Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You've got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the International Teacher Podcast. This is Greg coming at you from the Middle East. I've got JP with me. Good morning, JP.
Good morning.
And as always, on my other side, it's the guy that looks like me, according to all the kids. It's Kent the Cat Guy. How you doing, Kent?
I'm the better looking one. Very good to see you, Greg. JP.
Absolutely.
Great to be here.
Well, I'm happy. We have our guests coming to us from Iowa, but they're overseas right now. They just got home to the States for the summer, I believe. And this is Hannah and Jake.
Hi.
Did I get that right? Loney.
Good
Yeah, how you guys
morning,
doing?
Iowa.
Doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so welcome to the show. I can't wait to get into this. And let's do this first. Let's get a little bit of a elevator version of your education and as teachers and getting into leading up to international. Can you give us a little?
I think you should start because yours is longer.
Me?
So,
Oh, you're talking to her.
Yeah.
so I actually grew up as a missionary kid in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. And my senior year of high school, I was in Iowa at a high school here in Iowa. And then I went to Iowa State for college, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, because what college age student knows exactly, at that time. And I met this guy randomly. And
walking down the street.
For the audience, she's pointing to Jake.
Yeah,
not Kent and not
these
Greg.
I
guys.
should have specified that. So we started dating, and I was like, well, my parents are in Rio, and here I am, and I don't really know what I'm doing with my life. And then you were going into teaching, and
So I taught a year in Texas, in Houston. You were finishing up your last year of college, and we visited Brazil.
Yeah, so my parents were moving back to Minnesota at the time, and they flew me down to Rio for spring break because as like a final goodbye. And on the very last day that we were in Rio, we got a job offer for him to teach at the school that I attended and graduated from in Rio. And we were set. Ooh. I mean, that was like, March or April?
Yeah.
We were getting married in June. We honeymooned in New Zealand, arrived on a Thursday or Friday into the U.S., and then flew out the following week to Rio. So like that summer, and hit the ground running with all sorts of jet lag at that time, going from New Zealand to
the States and then down to Brazil.
Yeah.
Hannah, can I ask, were you a teacher then by that time? Did you get a double contract, or was it just a single contract?
Just a single contract.
It was just me.
So I was a trailing spouse, but my bachelor's is in communications. And so I was working kind of part-time at the school with, I built their website. I did some of their social media stuff. I helped plan events, things like that. And then I got my teaching certification and moved into a classroom setting as an assistant at first. And then once I officially got my certification, I moved into a full-time teaching position.
Yeah, so, for the second half of the year, there was someone that left, and they said, Hannah, you have your teaching certificate now. You want to jump in? So she jumped in second half of that year.
How did you get your certification? Was that online?
Yeah, so originally I went through the certification of teacher excellence or something like that. And then when we moved to Kuwait, I got my certification through Teach Now, a better certification through Teach Now through Moreland, I guess is what it's called now, Moreland University.
Moreland University.
Yeah.
Is that the Washington, D.C. one that can transfer over? Nice.
And then actually now I'm working on a master's in elementary education through UNI.
University of Northern Iowa.
Yeah,
that's one of Greg's favorites.
Jake, give us a little bit of your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
I grew up in Iowa. That's why we're in Iowa now. I just was here my whole life. I went to school to be a teacher at Iowa State University, and then I got my first teaching job. Jobs in Iowa are really competitive because of the University of Northern Iowa, so it was hard to find a job here. So I got my first job at a charter school in Houston. It was a Harmony school, which is one of the biggest charter schools in Texas. I only taught there for a year before we went to Brazil. And that wasn't the original plan, but when you get an offer like that, it's kind of jump on it. Yeah. We taught 2 years in Brazil, and then that's when we moved to American School of Kuwait. That was around 2017.
Yeah.
I think.
Jake, just real fast here. You grew up in Iowa. You spent your whole life in Iowa. You get certified in Iowa. You think you're going to teach in Iowa. You can't find a job. You go to Texas. But what made you take that leap overseas? You know, your story is not one where you're like, you know, I lived my whole life to travel. I can't wait to travel and go overseas. What was it that made you think, you know what, I could see myself living and working abroad?
So when I was in school, I did something called People to People and went to United Kingdom, went to England, Ireland, and Wales. And that's where I fell in love with travel. That was in I think I was in 8th grade going into 9th grade. And it was a student ambassador program where you had like a homestay with some of the families. You did some tourist stuff around the country and did some volunteer stuff. And that's kind of where I started falling in love with travel.
We're all quiet all of a sudden.
Sometimes we're like, just stop. Because I did have a question and then it just went out of my
Jump in there,
head.
JP.
Well, I wanted to know how, between the Brazil and the Kuwait, what did you do to find the Kuwait? Because it sounds like maybe, did you go to UNI, to the job fair there?
No, actually, we didn't. We started looking for jobs. I think we were going to sign up with Search Associates, and we were doing all the like paperwork and stuff with Search Associates, but we never made it official. I don't think we ever signed up for that membership. But at the same time, we were doing a whole bunch of research, casting a really wide net on, you know, everywhere and anywhere in the world that would take us, right?
So I think we were signed up for, there was a few of the different sites. So
the international
Teachaway was maybe one of them. But I was just looking up schools and just applying, just going right to their website. And
Hannah, I could see how you jumped into being the trailing spouse. It was in Brazil.
Yeah.
It was the school that you had attended as a student. And then for you to spend your first assignment there, that sounds so cool. But were you then thinking to yourself, you know, I'm open to anywhere in the world? I heard from Jake. Jake said, I'm a traveler. I want to go out and see people. Were you a traveler too? I know you grew up, you went to school in Brazil, but did you see yourself then taking off for the world after that?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I wanted to do with my degree in communications. I saw myself, you know, I want to do something big, travel, you know, see the world. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to go about that. And this opportunity came about and just took it, you know?
I got a good question. Let's talk teacher wheelhouse. Jake, what are you teaching, or what is your wheelhouse for teaching? Is it secondary? Because Hannah, you're elementary.
I am also elementary. I did not start in elementary. So my first job was when I was in Texas, was middle school social studies. So I taught, and this one always makes me laugh. I taught Texas history and I think U.S. history till the Civil War, but nobody wanted to teach 7th graders, so they put me on Texas history as the Iowan, which I think was funny. But
That is comical.
when we went to Brazil, at first there was a high school social studies position available. They had a student teacher there that they really liked, so at first that was the job that I was going there for. But the principal called us back and said, you know, we have this guy that was teaching with us. We really like him. We like you too, Jake. How do you feel about teaching 4th grade? And I said, well, I want to go to Brazil, so let's try it. And that's how I got into elementary.
That's how you end up as the music drama teacher, Jake. Be careful.
But,
Kent is teaching 4th right now, and I grew up through my last 20 some years. I did elementary mainly. and across the board. As you get older, you just have to sort of say, yeah, I've done it all. But elementary is my wheelhouse. Same with Kent, and JP is more of like a upper to mid level with French and with administration and stuff. So we all sort of fit together here, and it's great to hear how you guys, as a teaching couple, if you're both elementary or you're, of course, very accepting for even middle school if you had to, right? We sign up for those jobs and the opportunities, but it sounds like Kuwait had what you wanted. So you found them online, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember we did our first interview with them, and we got off the interview, and then, we walked to school that day. And as we were walking to school that day, I was like, I feel like that didn't go as well as I had hoped. And
video, right? Video interview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why is that, Hannah? What was the feeling?
I don't know. I think it was me. I think I felt like I wasn't as sufficient enough because I didn't have as much experience or as much know-how, the pedagogy behind it, And so I felt like on my end, it didn't go as well, I should say.
But we got the job.
Yeah.
That was just our initial feeling when you had the interview.
How many interviews did you have with them? That you had the initial one video, and then you walked to school thinking I'm not good enough, or didn't go well.
Then they had us interview with the superintendent at the time, and this honestly is maybe how we got the job. She was an Iowan, so
yeah, and she taught in Brazil,
so we had a bunch of connections there.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You just never know when the connections are going to happen.
Exactly.
And a lot of it is gut instinct and trust.
Mm-hmm.
So on both sides, right? So the superintendent or head of school is feeling out the couple. Are they someone that are going to come through, with the signed contract? Will they show up at the airport? All of that. That's a trust.
Yeah.
And then for you guys as well, it's sort of a gut instinct because you're going to the Middle East unseen. You'd never been there, correct?
No.
So you step off the plane. What were your first impressions when you got there?
It was hot.
Yeah, because it was August
'Cause it's
or
August,
July.
right? Yeah.
It was a very different type of heat than Brazil. So Brazil, you sweat all the time, but this was, you're just going into the oven, which I'm sure Greg and Kent, you can relate to.
Sure. Saw a man burst into flames yesterday. He just melted into a little globule on the sidewalk.
Yeah, when it's hot when Burger King runs their they'll cook your burger with solar power, right?
That's something they do. They advertise in Kuwait in the summer.
Oh.
They were the hottest country in the overall in the world at 53 degrees Celsius a couple of years back, right?
Yeah.
53 is the top I've heard.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
We could make it up and make it sound even hotter if you want. Kent, go ahead.
I was just going to say, sorry, Jake and Hannah, I was just very impressed that the ITP has now gone Celsius with our temperatures. Yes, did anyone catch that? 53.
I didn't because I always speak in Celsius.
Yeah. What is that in Fahrenheit? Like 125?
Yeah. 125.
Without Googling it, it's like 125 degrees, right? And we're used to that here in the Middle East. So there's some really hot days. Go ahead, Kent.
No, sorry, Jake and Hannah. So you were in Kuwait. Are you still in Kuwait? Or
yes.
Where are you?
Yes.
You said that you're in Iowa. Are you done with your school year this year?
Yes. Yeah. Just last week, right before there was a holiday in Kuwait, so they ended right before that.
You guys suck. We still have tomorrow.
That's only because our last day is until tomorrow. Before you jump in, JP, how long have you all been in Kuwait now?
When we came in 2017, we stayed 3 years until 2020. And actually, our first son was born in Kuwait about a month. Well, maybe no, it was a few weeks before COVID hit. And we left Kuwait that year. It was really complicated to get our son back into the country.
They shut down all their visas, all their residencies. So even though he was born in Kuwait, we could not get him back into Kuwait because we couldn't get him residency.
Sounds like Kuwait.
And before we get too far away from the question, we then went 2 years to Houston. So we went back to Houston and taught schools there. And then We went back to Kuwait 2 years later. So we have been in Kuwait back again 2 more years. Next year will be our 3rd year back.
Was that agreed upon by the superintendent or was it just simply, hey, we're going to reapply and see if maybe they'll take us back?
I think it was like April of that school year. We were just not enjoying being in the public school setting, and we wanted to get back into international teaching. So we emailed him and we said, hey, got any availabilities for us? We can start in August. And he was like, absolutely, come on back.
So that's how we got back there. Yeah.
And that's one of the dangers, would you all agree with me, of international teaching is you can't really easily go back. once you've
go back to the U.S.
Yeah, you can't easily just jump into U.S. public schools. And it sounds like, what was it about the U.S. public schools that made you think, you know what, I think Kuwait?
To me, in some ways, it felt a little backwards on things. There was a lot of red tape around like teaching and support too, even like support in the classroom. And, you know, we were often told to just teach to the standardized tests, and that was what mattered. And we were like, no, we want to teach, you know, we want to teach. Like,
admittedly, that might be a Texas thing. Texas is big on its standardized tests. So that might not be true for the whole United States.
They write all the textbooks too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about, did you experience any counterculture shock re-entering after Brazil, after Kuwait? You'd been overseas for a few years and now you're back in Texas.
I mean, yeah, we experienced a lot of counterculture shock too. We felt like it was a lot harder to make friends in the U.S. because the things that you do, the things that you talk about with your international backgrounds and your international teaching friends is a lot different. I feel like you live more life with them. They're like, hey, I want to go to the grocery store. Yeah, let's do it, you know, or hey, I need to go get this document taken care of. Yeah, let's go do it. Whereas in the States, you know, they're like, I don't know if I want to grab coffee, you know, and you're like,
yeah, we teach with you all day. We don't want to see you anymore until tomorrow. That's like Kent says that to me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with Hannah. That was the biggest thing for me. I was teaching 2nd grade and what was hard for me was I was the only male teacher, which most of the international schools I've been, there have been other male teachers in elementary. So that was a little bit difficult. And just like what Hannah said, people just were not open to building relationships. I remember inviting one of my coworkers, finding out that they played board games. It's like, oh, we love board games. Do you want to come over and we'll do a board game night? And it was almost like, oh, wait, why are you inviting me this fast? This is way too fast. You just met me. But that's kind of what I've gotten used to being an international teacher is you build relationships fast. And
you have to, because the relationship that you build at international schools, for our listeners that have not been overseas, when you go teach overseas, your comfort zone is built and your community is built around your job because we're all sort of guests in a country. Mm-hmm. And even though we have some locals that we get used to and we get to know and accept it, our comfort zone happens to start with the cohort of new teachers that first year in the country. And that continued on. But then as you branch out a little bit, your community, your comfort zone opens up and you get to know more and more people working there. But like you're saying, I don't see that happening in the States because you're just one of the staff. You're just another person in the States, in the state of Texas. Although y'all are, you know, all y'all are you're foreigners down there.
Yeah. And that was maybe an added barrier to us is we didn't really want to do the cold, and way licenses transfer, it was just easier for us to teach in Texas. I already had a Texas license and it was harder for you to transfer your DC license to Iowa. So
yeah, but you're Yankees.
You know, you guys bring up an interesting dynamic, and I hope the ITP crowd really tuned into that last one, is the community. You know, in the United States right now, it does feel hard. You know, I've talked about this on the podcast before of trying to throw a block party back in my neighborhood, and I can't get past the Ring doorbell. I can't get someone to open the door when I knock on the door to invite the neighbors over. It can be challenging. I will say about international schools now, I've been 10 years at my current assignment. And I would say that early on, people kind of rally around you, they surround you, you have a cohort, and it's almost to the point where it's overwhelming at first. People are so nice and so friendly and want to get to know you. Here I am 10 years later, and what I found is slowly over the years, those dozens and dozens of people have sort of gone elsewhere into the world. And the good point is I know people all over the world, but slowly but surely your community whittles down a little bit over time instead of grows. Just something that I've noticed over the years.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. And especially like that dynamic changes when, like for us, when you have children and children overseas, at least for us, when we first moved or when we first went to Kuwait and even Brazil, we, spent a lot more time with the younger single people or the younger single married or younger married newlyweds. And we weren't spending as much time with the families. And now, we're with the families more because we have 2 kids and our kids play with their kids. And, that community has changed over time, right?
Speaking of cohorts and the closeness, the year that I arrived in Oman at the American school in Muscat, we were a big cohort. It wasn't normal, but we were maybe 12 or 13 people. There were a few singles, a few families with kids, a few married couples without kids. So it was a nice mix of everybody. But we were stuck on this bus waiting for our blood test results. We'd all traipsed into the clinic, got our blood test. We had to wait for the results. We couldn't do anything else. So we sat on this air-conditioned bus in the middle of, you can imagine, July in Oman, just like in Kuwait, right? I think we were on that bus. It felt like 12 hours, but it was probably more like 2 or 3, but 3 hours just sitting in a bus in a parking lot. You gel, like we just gelled. And there was a family that said, my son's birthday is in 2 days and we know nobody. And we all made a pact to show up at his birthday party. So now this kid had 12 people at his birthday party, plus the kids that came along with the families. And that's what happens overseas is that you just gel really quickly. It's kind of forced where you're in a bus together and you can't go to the bathroom for 3 hours. So you talk, you get to know each other. But that's the lovely thing about international teaching is that instant community, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And community is everything too when you don't have your family overseas with you, right?
I would like to ask a little bit more about the kids. How old are your kids now?
We have 2 kids. One is 4 years old. One is 2 years old.
Okay, awesome. Do you have any stories about you said that your first child was born in Kuwait, right?
Yeah. we definitely have.
It's a good question.
Stories about that because COVID was crazy. So we had our son. He was born in February, and then COVID hit Kuwait earlier than in the States. We had a holiday weekend. It was their National Day weekend, and that's where nobody came back after that. So
Airports
really
closed, all that.
That was nice for me because we didn't really have there was no paternity leave, but I got to stay home immediately after that. So that part was really nice. But what Kuwait did during the pandemic, which was really scary for a parent of a newborn, was our neighborhood was high cases. So they locked us down in the neighborhood. You could not leave the neighborhood. They had like barbed wire fences up. They
had police patrolling. There were only certain hours you could go out. I don't know if you guys have the grocery store Lulu in Saudi, but Lulu was not in our neighborhood. So we could not get to Lulu. We could get to the smaller like Indian grocery stores, which was fine, to get stuff, but to get like the home comforts from back home that you're used to, we couldn't get that. My doctor was out of our area and I had to get like special permission to go see her. We had made a deal with one of our friends who lived out of that area. I gave her this list of groceries to go get for me, right? And she met me at the doctor's office and I put it in my trunk and I drove it back. And the whole time I'm thinking, please don't pull me over. And like, I'm supposed to be out for, medical reasons. And I've got all these groceries in my trunk and like, and I go with it, the checkpoint is fine and everything, but yeah.
That was a little crazy.
The things we did, the things we did
that's our first
steer
police
around
story
that.
about Rice Krispies, right?
Yeah.
I got pulled over. I had Rice Krispies.
Yeah.
One of the things I was getting towards also is that it might be a good question. It might be a whole nother episode just to talk about having a child in another country while you're working as a teacher, because some people are like, what? You could actually, like, you have insurance for that? Or is it covered? And there's a lot of deeper conversation. The reason I relate to it is that my first year or second year teaching overseas was in Honduras, and the teaching couple that lived right next door to me had their child in Honduras. And I remember the doctor coming in and like smoking a cigarette. He's like, "Yeah, all right." He comes into the operating room. They have the baby, and then the nurse is smoking in the hallway. And this is like 2002 or 3. But there's a picture of 3 teachers, and 2 of us are like the uncles, right? Yeah. So here's like 3 men and a baby, and it was different to have that kind of care in a hospital somewhere else than in the States. Yeah. Those memories are very hazy now for me. Of course, Bryn would remember all of that and tell you multiple stories. Mm-hmm. But to have a child as a teacher overseas in a different hospital it brings up a lot of like questions for people, but I think that's fantastic you did that.
Yeah.
Some will go back to the States.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your experience in a hospital there.
So actually, I have the experience of having a child overseas, but our second was born in Texas right before we went back to Kuwait. So I was able to, like, through that pregnancy, compare and contrast. You know, I will say that my experience in Kuwait far outranked my experience than having a child in the U.S. The healthcare,
it was so much better.
Yeah, the healthcare in Kuwait is a lot better. Our health insurance paid for, like, I think just about everything. There were a few like smaller items that they didn't pay for, but every time I went in, I had an ultrasound, and my OB was monitoring the pregnancy throughout the entire thing. I was not like at risk for anything. It was a great pregnancy. I traveled the world on that pregnancy. We backpacked through Russia when I was 2 months pregnant.
Not many people say that.
Yeah. And we did a lot of travel, and then we backpacked Europe shortly after that too.
We were trying to get it all in before we were no longer just the 2 of us.
But
it's like 8 days before the baby's coming out in Europe in the Himalayas, going, we're going to get this final peak before it comes out.
They call that, there's a term for that. They call it the baby moon.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's called baby moon because you have sort of a honeymoon travel before you have a baby, because after you're not going to be going anywhere.
Baby
have you heard
in
of this
Cyprus actually
no,
with a couple of our friends, and it was my last hurrah before having the baby, but the hospital that I gave birth at in Kuwait used to be a 5-star hotel. So believe it or not, you walk in, it's marble floors, it's all live music playing,
there's a violinist in the corner playing music.
It's so fancy.
Wow.
It was very luxurious. I had a really great pregnancy. My mom flew in a week before my due date, so she was there in the delivery room with us. I gave birth, and then after that, I got a massage. They gave me a free massage in the hospital room.
That's of course because you booked the club lounge at the hospital, so it worked out well.
Yeah.
Kent's gonna go and stay in Kuwait now.
Well, I think even you had like 3 days just paid for by insurance. We got to stay there 3 extra days, and that was not the case in Texas. It was like, all right, you get one night and get out of here, just get away from us.
I was waited on hand and foot by the nurses. They did all the diaper changes for our son for the first few days. They, all I really had to do was just lay there and be pretty and enjoy my newborn, right?
And have the baby.
Yeah. So
I know our audience is going to be wondering this. Did you have to speak Arabic to be able to deliver this baby in Kuwait?
Kuwait, unlike Brazil, uses so much English everywhere. It's a blessing and a curse. It means that we haven't learned very much Arabic because we just haven't had to use it. when we were in Brazil, I had to learn. You spoke fluent Portuguese, but I had to learn Portuguese just to get around. I mean, really what I know of Arabic is the words that I need to know if kids are using bad words. So I know those, and I know just basic phrases. That's about it.
But at the hospital you guys were at, there were probably people working there that were non-Kuwaiti mostly, because Kuwait's full of people that are expat.
Exactly.
There's about 1 million people. There's about 750,000 Kuwaitis, I believe, and the rest are expats. And there's about 4 million in Kuwait. So that's 3 million. It's 3 to 1, basically, of people from India and Bangladesh and all of those places that come to the Middle East and work, very similar to where we live. And I just remember Kuwait being that country where everyone's from somewhere else, right? All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all 4 of us at the itpexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITPexpat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITPXpats. That's with an S. ITPXpats is our handle.
All right, and thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners, and though we're not monetized, we are here for you, and we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show.
Jake and Hannah, we've had guests on, and we've talked about Kuwait before, but it's always been about sort of some of the hardships of living in the Middle East and living in Kuwait. But you guys sound so positive. Does your experience overall, would you call your experience in Kuwait overall positive? Are you feeling sort of this energized about your stay there overall?
Yeah, I think you want to go?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's always pros and cons to everything, right? But I feel like it's all about perspective. And I think one of the biggest things that helped us have a more positive mindset going into Kuwait was our experience in Brazil. We understood that the world doesn't function like it does in the US sometimes. And I feel like coming from that mentality has really helped form that positivity for us. But overall, yeah, we've had a very positive experience for the most part in Kuwait. There's always things about the culture that we don't like. For example, the wasta, if you know that terminology.
I don't know if that's a Kuwait thing or a Middle East thing.
Middle East thing.
It's a Middle East thing.
Explain that for the listeners. Can you tell them what wasta means?
So wasta is like it's like favors pretty much. So somebody who say is the head of a school, for example, and you're really good friends with them, and you're like, hey, can I get my child moved up a grade or moved into this class because we're really good friends. And sometimes it may not always be the best thing for that child or the best thing, but they're going to do it anyway because it's just that culture.
I think, that's probably the negative, but I just take an attitude of it as, all right, if this is what's happening, this is what's happening. I'm going to do the best that I can with my job, with these. It's just a reality. I feel like the people that have a more negative view get really hung up on that. And, I also think some of the positives, the reasons we went back was a lot of it was we knew the place. We had friends still there. And childcare is so much cheaper in Kuwait than it is in the States. And honestly, better because we have we're able to, for about half the price we were paying in the States, hire a nanny that we love that hangs out with our kids and they get personal care. That was one of the biggest reasons to go back to Kuwait. And I think that's a huge benefit of Kuwait, as well as travel.
Well, not just Kuwait. That's living overseas, right? I mean, a lot of places overseas, you can hire a housekeeper, a gardener, a driver.
Yeah. It's in my top
depending
3.
on the country, you can have a full staff and you're not a millionaire.
Yeah. And I also think Kuwait is so, coming from Brazil, Kuwait is so safe. And I don't think people know that. We have the biggest questions back home, like, oh, do you is how do you feel living in Kuwait? Or, are you always on edge or something? It's the opposite. It's I come back to the States sometimes. I'm a little bit on edge because there I don't have to worry about anybody stealing anything. I could leave a laptop in a Starbucks and it would be there 5 hours later. There's none of that type of crime in Kuwait, and that's kind of a benefit as a parent.
Yeah.
I put in 2 years in Kuwait, and it was partially to get away from a different school. I had a bad situation that I needed to recover from and teach at another school. So I went to Kuwait, and a long story short, but one of the things that I noticed in my experience compared to yours is that you are a young couple. You started a family, so there's not a lot to do in Kuwait. Maybe it's changed since 2007, but there was nothing. And in fact, I could go north to Iraq, and the border was closed because of war. And then I'd go over to Saudi Arabia, and it was closed because there was no tourism, no visa, no even getting in. And then the rest was desert and then water. That was it. And it's got one city, Kuwait City, right? And maybe it's changed since then, but as a young couple and a young family, I think it would be a little bit easier for you to spend time together and to be together, as opposed to being someone that's single and twiddling his thumbs going, what the heck do I do now? I wish I had known about podcasting back then. I would have started back then.
Yeah.
But I ended up doing a master's course or something to keep busy. And then all the Kuwaitis would get on the first thing smoking. The minute there was like a holiday, all the Kuwaitis would disappear, and then we would work and then go on our vacation. That was my experience, and it was more negative than yours. I'm so happy to hear a positive experience of Kuwait. It really is refreshing for me because I don't dwell on the past, and I've done other positions, but hearing you both talk about Kuwait in a positive way makes me very happy. And I'm happy for our listeners to hear that there's some great experiences in Kuwait.
And also for the listeners, Kuwait is very family friendly now, especially if you have young children. We take the boys out all the time to like various indoor play places. There's so many different malls, and they're all, it's kind of like a mini Dubai. So the malls are really nice and fancy, and we go out all the time with them.
I think what you're saying, Greg, is true. If you're not a family, it is hard to find stuff to do. Now there is some things, but if that's if you are looking for that in an international experience, that is not Kuwait. For families, there's cheap childcare. It's safe. It is cheap travel to other places. So
So that brings me to my question about traveling within the Gulf. So Jake, I think we talked about before the show about coaching, right? Yeah. About getting to travel to the other relatively close countries and doing sports tournaments. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The first time I was in Kuwait, before I had kids, I coached swimming and I coached speech and debate, and we traveled for those. We traveled mostly within the Middle East, so mostly within the GCC, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council. So Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman. I don't think I missed any of them, but where we traveled when I was there is I went once to Abu Dhabi in the UAE and then once to Dubai. So for my sports travel, that's just how it lined up. I'm a little bit sour because COVID, for swimming, we were actually going to go travel to Greece, which would have been awesome. And then COVID happened, but did not get to go to Greece. But
damn COVID.
Yeah, we the travel is for coaching was great because in Kuwait, it's such a small country. To be able to compete, you have to travel. So I know other people have gone to Jordan before. They have gone to Saudi before. This was a few years ago. I don't think it's true now, but a few people went to Lebanon before things got a little bit less safe in Lebanon. But yeah, there was a lot of ability for the school to pay for you to travel to some of the other countries in the Middle East.
Well, I'm a former volleyball coach myself, and I got to travel all throughout Southwest Asia. So I went to 3 different cities in India. I went to Sri Lanka. I went to Kathmandu. And this is all thanks to volleyball. And the experience of traveling with kids might sound like, oh, it's not great. You're tied to these, watching these kids, but they're good kids, right? They're on the team because they're responsible and they come to practice and stuff. And especially at the varsity level, you're at like a really high level athletically. So the kids are not out there running around getting in trouble. They are in homestays. And you sometimes, Jake, as a coach, did you have homestay or did you sometimes stay at hotels?
So we only stayed at hotels when we were there. So it sounds like it would have been hard, but it wasn't. What we did was we just told the kids we were going to put duct tape on not duct tape, masking tape on the door so that when it was lights out, they couldn't leave. And none of the kids thought to just go take everybody's masking tape off, so it was fine. We didn't have any issues.
I think you should duct tape the kids instead.
I was like, wait, where were we going with this duct tape?
The door so that if it would open, it would break. Yeah.
I'll prepare the next ITP apology letter. I'm not sure who to send it to.
I wanted to tack on a little bit. We're talking about sports, and there are other things that in international schools. There are other conferences. There's other things that the school sends you to, depending on the school. There's MUN. There's JMUN, Junior Model United Nations or Model United Nations. There's sports of all kinds, depending on the schools. There are debate clubs, like you said. There's other things, right? There's other conferences of
robotics,
music.
Lego.
Yeah, robotics. There's music. And there's all of these things that the international schools do within their regions, and sometimes they do them across regions too, right? So for the kids, and then being a part of the school that you're doing the coaching or you're doing the leadership for student groups, you end up going to it, right? It's fascinating depending on the school you're at and the sports they're involved in or the kinds of activities that you lead. Those can be some perks that we rarely talk about on our show. I remember I was part of middle school in Switzerland at a boarding school at Tassis, and part of being the middle school dorm parenting, I had to go on ski trips for like a week with the kids. Isn't that terrible? Yeah, I know. Or in Egypt, I had to go on a tour with the kids for their break, their week without walls, and they'd go somewhere. And while some of the kids were going down the Nile, I had to go through Egyptian pyramids with the other kids that were staying back.
Jake and Hannah, do you have some of those experiences in Brazil? Because you were there for 2 years. Were you able to go around some of the countries?
But no, we didn't not for sports. The school we were at was very small. It was Rio International School, RIS, and there was only one teacher per grade level. And so the first year I was there, when I was teaching fourth grade, I had a 12-person class. So they had a football team, but it was only within, a soccer team. It was only within, I think Brazil. Yeah, maybe just Rio. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But growing up as an international school kid, our school did Week Without Walls at the high school level. And that was really awesome because I remember for one of our Week Without Walls, we were doing a lot of community service that week. And we got to go to Bola Pra Frente, which is a local organization that was started by one of Brazil's famous Brazilian soccer players to get kids off the street. And it created after-school activity opportunities for them instead of going out on the streets during that time. That was like an amazing opportunity to do as an international school kid.
And then what about travel? Did you get to, because the other thing for international teachers is we have lots of vacations, right? Little long weekends and weeks.
In Brazil, it was a little bit different than Kuwait. We did a lot more travel within Brazil. And it's such a big country.
10 times bigger than Kuwait, at least.
Yep. So we went to like Foz do Iguaçu, which are the Iguaçu Falls.
We went to Búzios, which was a little beach town. We went to
the Amazon. So we went to, what's the name of that town? Now I'm forgetting.
Manaus.
We went to Manaus in the Amazon and went fishing for piranhas and saw river dolphins, and it was crazy. Yeah. Our salary was a lot lower in Brazil, so it was harder to do international travel.
We went to Peru. We went to Machu Picchu.
That was the one international thing we did that we wanted to do before we left South America.
So in all your travels, can you tell us 3 things that you need to have or that you need to bring with you to feel comfortable?
when we moved to Kuwait and Brazil, this wasn't as big of an issue. But when we moved to Kuwait, one of the things that I had to have was definitely coffee, which again was not an issue in Brazil because actually I export Brazilian coffee and
You need specifically Brazilian coffee.
I thought she was going to say diapers.
yeah, diapers, but yeah. So I like buy it in bulk and have it sent to where we're at and like, yeah.
I'm trying to think of this. If you think of another one, you go. I'm just kind of, I don't need as many things anymore. I can kind of get by without a lot of things. I've noticed as I've gotten more acclimated to this lifestyle. I need to make sure my kids are on the plane. That's kind of important. We don't want to leave them.
Kent always says my wife is number one, and then his cat. Yeah, that's fair enough. We're not putting you on the spot. That's fair enough. We have another question for you. You could think about, and if you think of it in a third thing or whatever, or second thing, you can always bring those up later. However, second question: do you have a police story for us?
I have at least one police story. I have several police stories from every country I've lived in.
Okay, go.
But I think you should do the Kuwait one when you were trying to leave.
Okay, so this was another crazy COVID police lockdown story. So we were trying to leave Kuwait with our son, right? And we left.
This was April 2020. The school said we need to get out because the school we're at, they provide the housing and they do all of the maintenance and things. And they said, if the air condition goes out this summer, we can't get anybody in. So you need to go home. Usually you can stay there in the summer, but
You're like, oh, okay.
So we packed all our bags. They had arranged charter flights from the airport, with the embassy. What happened was we had packed all of our bags. We loaded up the car. We drove like a minute or a couple minutes to the nearest police checkpoint to leave our area, right? And we show them our passports, our boarding passes, all of that. We're trying to leave. And they're like, no, you can't leave. And we're like, we have to be on this flight. Like, we have this flight paid for. Like, we don't want to, we have to leave. And they told us, no, absolutely not. You cannot leave. And so we were like, okay, now what? And they're like, well, you can try the other checkpoint down, further down. And see
down the road.
That other guy might let you through.
Try them down there.
So we drove down to that checkpoint, and the way that checkpoint was set up, it was along this really long road. I think about 200 meters apart. There were two checkpoints, right? So we get to the first checkpoint and we show them our passports, our tickets, all that. They're like, yeah, fine, go ahead. The next checkpoint was at a roundabout,
Well, so a little bit of context. So where we drove up to the checkpoint, they wouldn't let the car go to the one that lets people in. So we had to get out, and we were going to have someone meet us on the outside to drive us to the airport. So we had to carry all our stuff across this no man's land to the next checkpoint.
So, we've got our 2-month-old son with us. He's in the car chilling with our friend. The AC is blaring. We're dragging all these suitcases down. We had somebody else's cat with us.
That was trying to get the cat out of the lockdown.
Yeah. And so we drag all this stuff. We meet our friend. We load up their car with our luggage. And we turn around to go back. And the police says, you can't go back. And I'm like,
and our kid is over there.
Our child's in the car.
And you're like, my baby.
And so I look at this police, I'm like, no, I've got to go back. We have more stuff. And he's like, no, you can't go back. You have to leave now. And I'm like, I look at him, full on mama bear. And I'm like, I have a baby in that car. You will let me go, and I'm like, and he's like, fine. So I walk.
But he said, that's the last time. And we still had the baby, and I think we didn't know if we were going to be able to get back in the country. So I think we still had 4 suitcases. So we're trying, we knew it was our last time. We had a baby and me trying to drag 4 suitcases without any help across this no man's land.
Oh my God.
Oh, and then also the police didn't speak any English. So we had some random person walk up to the police and they were translating Arabic to English for us. And we were trying to explain the situation. And I just remember getting in the car at that police checkpoint and I'm shaking, after all of that. I'm like, just get me out of here now. I'm like,
And I do want to stress, this is not normal Kuwait. This was a COVID era thing. Usually we don't have issues like that in Kuwait.
With a cultural episode with COVID on top of that. So it's an amazing story. I mean, you got out of there, right? The baby's with you now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Baby's not being raised by wolves.
Well, then when we were at the airport, they didn't want to let our son out because they're like, well, where's his visa? And I was like,
you shut down your country. There is no visa.
Oh, God. Yeah.
We only got one trip back to the car. You go get it. So for the ITP crowd, a Middle East checkpoint is no joke. Yeah. There's usually a couple of machine guns, sometimes a tank, half a platoon. So it's not just one retired, cop sitting there.
True. What a story. Yeah. Oh my God.
You guys got Jake and Hannah, tell us, first of all, you guys heading back to Kuwait in the fall?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
All right. You guys got any social media? Any place you write a blog? You got a podcast, a YouTube channel?
Instagram. I kind of do. It hasn't taken off very, very much, but I do post a lot about what it's like to be an expat in another country, an international teacher. My handle is That Expat Family on Instagram. So, I share a lot about our experiences traveling, our crazy experiences.
Let's go around the horn real fast here and final thoughts. Let's start with Jake and... Well, thank you for coming to our show this week. Jake and Hannah, do you have any final advice? Anything? Did I forget something, JP Mint? Hold on a second. I forgot something important. No, JP says no. She says windshield wipers. I'm supposed to ask you about the window. No, the tires. Were the tires on the car? All right. So, Jake and Hannah, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners?
I would say if you're thinking, if you're new thinking to going into international teaching, it's worth it. Even bad experiences that we've had, it's worth it. I think it's enriched our lives so much. Take the chance. I think what you can get from this podcast even is the bad stories are actually a lot of fun later on in life. So
with perspective.
Yeah. I guess I would also say, I know I've talked about international teaching with a lot of my colleagues when we lived in Texas. And I always told people, it's hard when you're away from your family. Yes. But you enrich your lives so much. So if you're worried about leaving your family because they're sick or because, whatever it is, you've never been away from your family, do it anyway. Take that risk, take that plunge. It's going to be a fun ride. It's going to be a great ride, I
would like to thank our very special guest, Jake and Hannah Loney. You could find Hannah's Insta, as the kids say, at That Crazy Expat Family. Did I get that right?
That Expat Family.
We are crazy, though.
That Expat Family. And I'd like to thank my co-host, JP Mint. You can find JP Mint at jpmintconsulting.com. And I'd also like to thank Greg, the single guy. You could find his latest book, International Teaching, The Best Kept Secret in Education, at www.amazon.com or wherever you find your finer books. I am Kent the Cat Guy. You can find me in room 402. And I want to thank everyone for joining us this week. See you next week.
Yay! You guys are awesome.